there is anecdotal evidence of offer fatigue. That's what they're saying, offer fatigue. Buyers are tired and frustration among buyers, but the whole country at this point over the last few months is a little drunk on real estate. Good morning, investors. Bradley here from Watson Estates, and you're listening to the largest, fastest growing podcast for Toronto real estate on iTunes, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Today, we're going to talk about demand and how it's been slacking the last few months, but also getting into what happens over the coming months. What do we have to look forward to? As a broker and investor myself, I want to know where there are opportunities and really what's taking place in our market. And that's what we're going to cover to start out. But then we're not going to stay there. We're going to jump into talking about different housing types. Specifically, since 2017, what one housing segment has outperformed all the rest over the last few years. And then I want to finish off with a warning, specifically to tenants, and in my opinion, the biggest warning that I could have made on the show since we've really started. We are seeing hard times ahead for tenants. So if you're a landlord or a tenant, you don't want to miss this segment. But I hope you guys have, like me, been enjoying the beautiful weather the last few days. Yesterday, we spent time with the girls out watching at the local airport, not Pearson, one of the airports that actually have airplanes these days. We were watching some of the small planes, flying off, and it was a whole lot of fun. At least it was for me. And we watched those ones with those little propellers on the front. You know what I'm saying? The ones that fan, they're like a fan for the pilot. That's what they're there for, right? That's my assumption. Because, if they stop turning, the pilot sweats, right? But we like to have some fun in the show. We try to keep it light as well. If you haven't already, if you're a fan of the show, please like and subscribe to our channel and offer your support. Leave us a comment down below. I know a lot of our content today comes from comments from viewers just like you. So let's start talking about today the demand that is slacking across Canada, not just Ontario, but it's also in Ontario, but across Canada as a whole. And then we're going to get into what happens next, what to expect in the coming months. So we're going to start with the article of the day, the number one article for Toronto real estate this morning in the Globe and Mail, called "Toronto Realtors See a Slackening of Demand." This shouldn't come as a surprise for you guys that follow our show. We've been talking about this for the last few months, but it's making headlines now. House hunters from the center of Toronto all the way to cottage country are running out of steam. They talked about with Patrick Roca, broker of Bosley Real Estate, and here's what he says. It's definitely a seller's market, but not like it was in February and March. He says the frenzy is not there. Supply has increased. The number of buyers competing has diminished. So they say there's an opportunity here. I'll let you guys make the call of that. And I really hope as you're listening to the show that you're getting both sides, you're getting both views. Obviously, I have my own opinions, but I want you guys to at least see both sides and where my opinion comes from so you can make those decisions for yourself. But here's what they say the opportunity is right now. For buyers who are exhausted by competition, this could present the opportunity to buy with less pressure. Compared to what we saw in March, absolutely, there's less pressure. But as John Pasala says on Twitter, Toronto's housing market feels very slow and sluggish for a market with just 1 month of inventory. How interesting is that? To make it feel like a buyer's market when really we're sitting on 1 month of inventory, still under 2 months in the condo space. We'll get into more details on those today. But how crazy is that? But really, in this picture, as you guys are thinking about investing, maybe you're buying your first home or whatever, there's a saying among the real estate investment community, if you want to really look at real estate as a true investment, they say time in the market is better than timing the market. The longer you're in here, the better you'll do. But absolutely, relative to what we saw a few months ago, there's certainly an opportunity. But obviously, there's still a lot of people on the sidelines, hence what's been going on with buyers freaking out and waiting a little bit here. Maybe they're enjoying their summer. Who knows? How dare they? But Mr. Roca points to a house that he recently sold. Really paints the picture of the problem we're facing in Toronto right now. Winchwood Park area. It was sold $400,000 over asking. Oh, killer, brutal. The property listed with an asking price of $2.249 million, and it sold for only $2.65 million with only 3 offers, right? But that's a slow market, only $400,000 over asking. But the main thing from what I'm seeing as someone involved in the market on a daily basis, as well as just from what I'm hearing, the buzz on the street, there's really 2 things that I see have changed. Number one is it's not directly offer prices that are low, but it's rather the bidders. The number of bidders is low, which of course equates to, unless you're Treb, in which case you think, well, that wouldn't necessarily change anything. Open bidding process doesn't affect anything. Prove it. But generally speaking, I think it's kind of common sense, at least in my mind, that when you get less bidders, you get a lower price. But the lower bidders is really what's the kick here. And there's also an increasing number of properties. This is number 2 that did not sell on offer night, which are then relisted in the following days with what? A higher asking price. There isn't much pressure on sellers, right? At least not at this point. Being able to relist is a little bit of a safety net. It's a good strategy if you think about it, right? You put circular windows in your plane, and if they break, water doesn't hit you square in the face. But it really is, right? There's no backup plan to putting your property up high and then not getting offers. I mean, I guess you could drop your price, but anyways, there's a safety net that's built in there. Why not post it low? And people are still taking that approach. But what comes next, right? Looking ahead, what happens in the next few months? Well, Mr. Roca expects sales to be calm this summer as many people look forward to travel and recreation opening up again after Ontario's lengthy lockdown. I mean, good for us, right? The biggest lockdown in the world. Number 1, let's go. Real estate prices, he says, will flatline. That's his prediction. You guys make your own call, but it's typical for sales price, by the way, to lower in the summer months compared to the spring. Obviously, we had an early spring this year as it relates to the real estate market. And so it would be natural to expect that overall prices would be lower than the last few months. That kind of comes with the territory. It'd be interesting to see what happens with the fall. And one question is, will the fall come early this year? There's a lot of things, and I won't get into it too much right now in my head, but this idea of vaccinating the world and immigration coming in, and what kind of policies will we have? And are they going to be available to come in time for school? Is it going to affect immigration? All of these things are going to play into the speed that we have a fall market, that, September, October market that we see in this kind of second bump each year. Anyways, moving on. People are putting more money than ever into housing. Listen to this. TD Bank chief economist Beata Soranchi, the senior economist James Orlando note that the amount of Canadians spending on their home now makes up 32% of total consumption on average over the past year, which might not sound like a lot, but this marks the highest proportion of spending on housing in nearly 50 years. We're really banking on housing. Both of them expect the Bank of Canada will further reduce its quantitative easing program in the coming months and signal the start of the interest rate hikes cycle in 2022. And I tend to agree we will probably see at least an attempt at increasing interest rates by 2022. That makes sense in my mind. But what is there to worry about, right? What is there to worry about? The plane won't crash. We're just going to keep coasting along. Even if it falls down, it's just going to go boing, boing, boing. But this next article is just in time for CMHC, who just revised their forecast up. They're like, yeah, there's some opportunities here. Prices are going to go up. Sales are going to go up. Well, right behind that, we saw Star had an article here called Real Estate Association revises sales forecast down as prices continue to rise. And we wonder why people are so confused with the market. One second, the real estate professionals saying it's going up and the government saying it's going down. And then all of a sudden, like we have today, flip-flop, right? High vaccine take-ups and the falling COVID caseloads are cooling the country's fevered pandemic real estate market, prompting CREA, the Canadian Real Estate Association, to adjust its still record-breaking sales forecast down for 2021. We're going to do good, but we're not going to do as good as we thought we were going to do early in the year. Originally, they thought that from March, we thought forecasts would say 16.5% this year. Now we've bumped that up, slightly steeper climb of 19.3%. That's for price, sorry. So price up 19, originally was up 16, but we are going to see a decline in the number of sales overall, citing falling month-over-month sales in April and May. The association said Tuesday there is anecdotal evidence of offer fatigue. That's what they're saying, offer fatigue. Buyers are tired and frustration among buyers, but the whole country at this point over the last few months is a little drunk on real estate. At least that's what I'm seeing, right? Reminds me of that time a French explorer crashed his aircraft into the St. Lawrence River. He drank too much champagne. But let's look specifically at Toronto, because we can talk about Canada, who cares? What's going on locally? What's going on in Ontario? What's going on in the GTA? Well, CREA found that while Ontario had the largest year-over-year price gains, month-over-month growth has also slowed most here out of everywhere, compared to other parts of the country where growth has continued to accelerate. So in that way, we're slightly standalone. Obviously, a powerhouse impacts the numbers as a whole, but Toronto specifically has not seen the same level of price acceleration as smaller Ontario cities and towns, but it has only about a month of listings inventory. So think Think of this, guys. We're looking at this as a buyer's market. No way, not even close. Seller's market all day long, 1 month of inventory. But when you compare it with small cottage country towns like Tillsonburg, they're down to weeks. Forget months. We're talking weeks in these small towns. So what's the biggest unknown? As we're kind of trying to figure out what's going to happen in the next few months, over the next year, where's the biggest unknown and where's the biggest risk of rising prices again? My answer to that is immigration. The resumption of immigration, however, could be a tailwind for demand. If demand is getting tired and it's not coming in anymore, immigration could be a very good fill for that. And talking to Christopher Alexander, who is the chief strategy officer of Remax Integra, said he anticipates a, quote, healthy 3 to 7% price increase. That's kind of talking from price, all stemming from incoming immigration. However, we know as investors, and having followed our show for a while, you should be aware, if you're not already, here's the FYI. Immigrants don't typically buy immediately when they arrive in Canada. And buyers are exhausted. So this combination means, yes, you might get immigration, but it might not mean an instant purchase of a property. In fact, the stats show us immigrants usually wait 3 years to buy. So let's look at Toronto versus the suburbs. And this is all obviously before we're going to get into which segment did the best. But just specifically talking about Toronto and the suburbs right now, he expects the pandemic flight to the suburbs, which has seen the biggest price gains right now, will slow. So all of this running, all of this getting to the suburbs, working from home, never going back, YOLO, it's going to slow. And people, he says, made a lot of COVID crazy decisions. I think there will be a cohort of people who bought in the suburbs or the country who are going to get bored and miss the action of an urban center. Just wait until sports come back and theaters and concerts. He says, I have a strong confidence Toronto is going to return to being an entertainment mecca. But I want to cover, I'm curious, what is the worst case scenario? Because we've seen a lot of predictions. I mean, the whole year has been filled with predictions. But where do we stand today? What are the big players? What is the highest risk scenario we can experience? And I thought, this could be fun. So when we look at the Financial Post, here's where we stand today. The article was called, Could Canada's High-Flying Housing Prices Come Crashing Down? And the breakdown is this, the worst case scenario, like the absolute worst, everything falls apart. Every possible bad scenario happens. In that case, RBC could see a 30% price decline. BMO could see a 29% price decline. And our government, the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, could see a 50% decline if we had 25% unemployment, just for fun, right? And then the article, what's interesting, I won't get into it, but goes on to explain how these catastrophic numbers are highly unlikely. But for those who say, we could have a crash, could be crazy. What do those numbers look like? Unless you're in the CMHC camp, which I don't know if anyone is in that case. The major banks are saying 30% downside is our highest risk. But how is it that the men controlling the planes expect it to crash, right? Would the doom and gloom go away if we only had lady economists? Probably not. An unmanned aircraft sounds unsafe too. All right, so let's get into talking about housing and which segment is and has been since 2017 the most profitable, the winner, the number one performer in our GTA market and in the 416. This stems from an article from BlogTO called Toronto condo prices have risen by 44% since 2017's housing peak. But are they still number one? This is what I want to add to the end. So we're going to go through this article, but then we're going to talk about, are they still the best? When we look at the weekly stats and we see where we're headed next, do they show the best opportunity? So the answer since 2017 is condos. In fact, here's how they say it. Bad news for those looking to get into Toronto's booming real estate market, but good for those who bought a few years ago. Condo prices keep getting higher. Properly, who did this study, found significant price increases across all housing types, but condos have been the biggest boost with 44% increase in average price since 2017. That actually surprised me. If you were to ask me since 2017, would condos, because we saw such tragedy in the condo space over the last few years, you would think, no, they're probably not ahead of everyone else. But you guys are soon to forget, myself included, of the success that the condo owners have had since 2017. In fact, behind them is townhomes with condo fees, by the way, up 33%, then semi-detached at a 27% increase, and freehold townhomes 26%, and detached did the worst, in fact, at 21% higher. So obviously, this is good news for condo owners. Let's face it, everyone who owns real estate right now is making money these days. Whoop-de-frickin' do. Here's a joke for you. A vegan Toronto condo owner who does CrossFit walks into a bar. Which one does he tell you about first? But this past year, they say condo sales were hit the hardest by the pandemic, which we experienced. While sales are now back up to pre-pandemic levels, it's relieving for condo owners to know that their investment have appreciated significantly over time. They go on to talk to Anshul Ruparel, the co-founder and CEO of Properly, but we want to look forward right now into the condo market. So let's take a moment just to kind of appreciate what's going on there. They say it's not so great for those looking to buy, right? Condos in Toronto appear to be bouncing back after months of COVID-related weak sales numbers. Condos have, in the news especially, been really dragged through the mud, especially when everything else was on fire. People ripping their hair out, right? Throwing it over their 10-story balcony. But a total of 2,886 condo units sold in the first quarter of 2021 outperformed pre-pandemic first quarter sales of 2,829. So we're actually outperforming pre-pandemic. So we've come all the way back as far as the number of sales. And they believe condo price will continue to rise even downtown. But are they going to be number one? Are they going to rise faster than other segments? Let's talk about that. GTA homes are also expected to continue to rise in value in the coming months and years. No duh. Sorry, that's my opinion. A lot of people be like, you're an idiot. I get it. I guess I am an idiot in some ways. Not in this way, but in other ways. The average price of a home in Toronto will cost $275,000 more in 2 years. That's CMHC. You know, those guys that think we could drop 50%. So it could drop 50%, or it could be up almost 300,000. Why bother? Why bother? But quote, following the extremely hot spring market we've just seen, we're beginning to see a slight cooling as we head into the summer months. That cooling applies to all segments. So let's talk about this. And one of the things we've also seen is that we've experienced the highest in the GTA, the highest year-to-date completions since 2015. Absolutely crazy. And a lot of people have been kind of trusting that that's going to be what slows things down. There's a lot of people expected completions alone to kamikaze the market, but that doesn't seem to have happened so far. Chewbacca makes a terrible pilot. Wookiee mistake. Guess he wasn't a one-hit wonder after all. But which segments is the best positioned to rise in the near future? Let's look at some of the stats. I'm going to get a lot of these from Scott Ingram, our friend over on Twitter. And we're going to look at what happened halfway through June, because we don't like to look at what happened last month. Old news, what just happened, and also what's happening this week. Here we go. 416 condos, apartments and towns. Sales are up, in my opinion, flat, 1.5% flatness in sales. But you could say, oh, condos this, condos that, they're so great. They outperformed since 2017. Well, but wait, when we see freehold sales, we're actually down 5.3%, but it's still solid, they say, compared to 2019, skipping 2020, because 2020 is a bit of a write-off. So we actually see sales coming down in freehold. We're going to talk about why shortly. But if anywhere there's an increase in sales, it's actually happening in the condo space. But everything from here up to this point, it would seem like condos. Things change right now. Here we go. The share of condos sold conditionally is actually down from over 20% in March to 8.3% this week. Freehold has floated around 5% since 2018 and is at 3.7% this week. So we don't see much fluctuation in the freehold side, but if we look at the past, we actually see the sold conditional numbers drop when there's struggling taking place, right? Because we have less property selling. Naturally, you'll have sold conditional deals in condos because of, status certificate and that review. So because of that, when you see a drop in that number, it usually reflects a drop in overall sales or challenges in the condo space. But there's a surging number of active listings with price changes for both freehold and condos. I want to read this Twitter post directly from Scott. Here's what he says. You can see the heat coming off of both markets here. Condos on price change at levels not seen in last 4 years, except for the end of 2018, which was the slowest sales time in December, the end of the year, and the big softening last fall. Other than that, we haven't seen this much cooling in these housing segments in a long time as it relates to active listings, meaning there's more active listings, there's more options. Good news for buyers. Too bad they're not here to enjoy them. And let's look at months of inventory, right? So we know months of inventory are sitting just over 1 month of inventory in the freehold space, 1.3 to be exact. But we see some stability in the months of inventory in the freehold, but in the condo space, what's interesting to me is we see a rise in the months of inventory. In fact, in the last, looks like May, June, July, even in the last month, we've seen a bump from close to 1 all the way up to almost 2. It's at 1.8 right now. So we're watching a steady increase in the 416 months of inventory for condos. And overall, 416 active listings for freehold are down for the third week in a row, whereas condos continue to rise. So we see a rising active listings, meaning either more is coming on, which is the case, and less is selling, which is not the case, but it's virtually flat. So overall, it's very interesting to see this dynamic playing out. So here's my moral of the story when I'm looking at the stats for the last, irrespective of what happened since 2017 and the condos being number one, the moral of the story is condos have outperformed since then, but the stats show greater tightness today in the freehold market. That said, I want to make sure it's a balanced approach here. Affordability, we know, is the biggest issue right now, right? And so we can see that condos is the only segment that has climbing sales. That's why I anticipate we're going to have some further climbing sales, because how the heck is anyone going to afford a freehold property anymore? So they end up steering towards the condo space. The rest is history. That's up to you guys on deciding what you think is going to happen. Do you think it's going to be the freehold? Do you think it's going to be a condo? Who's going to take the cake in the next 5 years? But I want to talk about hot topics. Here we go. If you haven't already, please like, subscribe to our channel if you've benefited from any of the rising prices of 2017 or benefited from our show. So I want to start discussing this article, which is a stories.com article. Toronto's downtown core has the highest proportion of employees who can work remotely. And I thought, you know what, this is good, because we like to talk about work from home. We like to talk the stats, people moving. In fact, there's a lot of people moving. The numbers are staggering. But Jan De Silva, president and CEO of Toronto Region Board of Trade, said, understanding how we survived and in some cases thrived during the pandemic is key to understanding how we will recover. You need to fully understand the past before we can move forward. And who doesn't love history? My granddad killed 50 German pilots in World War II. What a legend. He wasn't a very skilled mechanic. I'm just kidding. I'm not German. In fact, I'm actually part Jewish. How awkward. Anyways, moving on. Let's see what happened. Let's look at the stats. Toronto's downtown core has the highest proportion in their report of workers who can work remotely, 67% or more than 370,000 workers. That's a lot of bloody workers, right? Here's what they say. As you can imagine, when the pandemic took hold, this sheer volume of workers disappearing from downtown core to work remotely left serious impact on the remaining 181,000 workers in the area that have faced a greater risk of losing their jobs. The report noted the departure of daytime workers, combined with the collapse of leisure and business travel, has dealt a devastating blow to the area. There we go. Subsequently, some of the kind of outside, I'd love to talk about residential, but let's get into some of the office vacancy because they got the stats here. Office vacancy in downtown increased to 7.2% in the fourth quarter of 2021. In the pre-pandemic, it was 2%. That's pretty significant. The same period saw a further weakening of demand for suburban office space, where vacancy rates were already more than double and sometimes triple of downtown Toronto pre-pandemic. Now, I don't follow office too closely, but from what I can see, things are doing better. I mean, we're certainly moving along in the office space. I think there's a lot of hype, a lot of anticipation for people to go back to work, back to the office. But in this conversation, I want to move talking about for people who have opted to leave the city, they're going to run to the suburbs. That comes at a cost. It does. And the Star outlines some of those costs for us today. Statistics Canada has reported that between July 1st, 2019 and July 1st, 2020, over 50,000 more people moved out of Toronto than arrived from other parts of Ontario. It's not in this article, but we've talked about it before. We have had in the number of immigration actually have had a net increase in our population, but we depend so much on immigration, clearly, because within the province, people aren't going into the city. But as things open up, these couples, they're talking about the ones in this story, but couples in general may be in for some financial surprises, especially if they're unprepared. So some of the biggest money surprises are right here that they outline, and I agree with. They're things people, when you left the city, you didn't really think about. Maybe you're renting, you saw the opportunity to purchase a home, in which case you're kind of double whammied here, or you own something and you're experiencing some of these things that you might not have anticipated. For example, number one, your property taxes will go up. Who would have thought? You leave the city of Toronto, property tax goes up? Yeah, it's just sheer numbers, by the way. But one of the most unexpected financial realities many face when heading to the suburbs is the rise in property taxes, which can be double what they are downtown. I mean, there's some benefits to being in the city. We're going to ignore the municipal land transfer tax, but when you own a home, I mean, pay a little bit of property taxes is cool, no? It's just sheer volume of people paying into the pot. Naturally, the cost is lower. Number two, your ability and maintenance costs will go up too. Your utility, and maintenance costs will go up. So your cost of living in your home will go up. Not only are you likely to be dealing with a larger space, but you also aren't surrounded the way you are in an apartment building, which means less insulation. I mean, your cost to insulate, your cost of heating, for example, is generally less for a condo, for a townhome, even a semi-detached home, because you've got less heat escaping. I mean, these are things people kind of ignore. If you live in a detached home, insulation is a little bit harder. The costs go up. Not only are you paying to maintain your property, there's also a lot of initial one-time costs, such as buying a lawnmower. And then you get one of those townhomes that have no rear access and you need 2 lawnmowers. Or you get AstroTurf. The same can be said of furniture, right? I need to furnish this big old home. Number 3, about the commute, right? We got the commute. Added to that are the cost of commuting by car, which aren't always apparent, not only gas and insurance, but maintenance costs, as well as the ability of needing a second car. Maybe that one car won't cut it. Some might not even have a car. Maybe they're like, I'm going to commute. I'm going to take public transit, but then they forget, shoot, I got to get to the transit hubs. Therefore I need a car. And all of these things are kind of compounding, right? These are factors, people that maybe have moved out are now realizing and are saying, oh shoot, what did I do? Because number 4, which I think is probably going to be the biggest player in all of this, is commuting for your social life, the social side. They say if you're going to be living your old life in your new suburban home, it's going to cost you. So unless this time's up with you having kids and being okay with sitting on the side and, watching some airplanes take off here and there, if you want the action, you want to be right downtown, you're not going to get that in the suburbs. When you move to the suburbs, your cost of living does go up in many ways. It also gets far more boring. Then again, some people like boring things. So like pilots, right? You know what's a pilot's favorite kind of bagel? Plain bagel. Next hot topic, I want to talk about our last video because I got a lot of comments, a lot of feedback from you guys. And I thought, you know what, there's enough here. There's enough substance in here to share this as one of our hot topics. So thank you. Thank you for all that you guys do. Leave us some more comments down below. But will millennials ever own real estate? Again, was the name of the video. And I got 2 lines of comments. From lots of viewer feedback and 2 lines of comments. The first one being about pricing Canadians out. So Ruby Sultra said stress test equals only corporations and independently wealthy foreigners are buying real estate. And the rest of us stress out because we have nowhere to live. And then she goes on to say, I hate this planet. I think there's other places you don't have to leave the planet, though that's probably going to be a possibility in the near future. But for right now, you just need to leave Toronto, leave Ontario. And that's kind of what this whole video was talking about. Hardik Modi. Why would someone invest in technology robotics when you can make 30% money in a year just by buying houses? He also says only Canadian citizens and permanent residents should be allowed to buy homes. There's a solution. Can't say I've said that in the past. It's certainly a solution other countries have adopted. Certainly. George Davidson said, stop drug and mafia money buying real estate. Only Canadians should be able to buy real estate. There it is again. Leave the homes for the locals. Baseline. I heard Trudeau wants 1 million immigrants in 2022. Imagine the demand for homes. So that's the first line of comments. So the first line was specific to, we're kind of getting screwed, right? Prices going through the roof. I feel stuck. There's some changes that need to happen that aren't. The second line of comments, we're talking about folks leaving, actually getting out of here. Marika Brown, the GTA has become less livable. I've been looking to the Atlantic provinces. I want to stay, but the mortgage is only 1/3 of my rent. Interesting. LR said, a lot of my friends are talking about leaving right now. The GTA is just becoming depressing for young workers. It sucks. I don't want to leave my family, but it might be a sacrifice I have to make. How sad is that, guys? People are having to sacrifice their family in pursuit of owning real estate. And there should be changes that happen, right? Something's got to give. And as someone who invests in real estate, I see value in price appreciation, but to be honest with you, and not to mention I sell real estate, so increasing prices means a higher commission. Woo! But guys, I mean, even I'm concerned. I think there's got to be something's got to give. There's going to be opportunity. I think the low-hanging fruit is in many ways investors. But then there's this interesting dialogue, right? This idea of foreign offshore capital coming in. And someone specifically said they singled out China as having, bringing all this money in. And Adam Vaughan, an MP, who also happens to be the parliamentary secretary for housing, said, He pretty much accused them of having systematic racism. He said, if you've ever doubted the existence of systematic racism in the media, here it is, right? How interesting. So what John Passalis says, and I think there's an angle here, right? There's obviously, I don't think Adam is saying, I think he's specifically talking to the China specific comment. But what John Passalis is essentially saying is he said that the liberals are proudly supporting the sale of Canadian homes to foreign investors, but if you question their policies, they'll call you racist. Now, he wouldn't say I'm calling them racist, but we're pulling the race card as soon as you mention foreign capital coming in. Can we not just protect this asset class for locals, for people who are here? The federal government is definitely on track to destroy Canadians' ability to afford a home. If you guys haven't seen that yet, our eyes have been closed. And before you ask me to run an election, I'm sorry, but that's not a job for me. A kamikaze pilot could be cool, though. I almost got hired for one, too, actually, until I asked what the pension was. But that brings me into, we're going to talk about our third topic today. And this is a warning. This is probably the biggest warning to tenants that I've had on the show. This is a serious thing, guys. It's a serious thing. I mean, you guys know I'm very pro landlord, but this is going to really show I'm pro people. Okay, let's face it, I'm pro people. But as a landlord, I sympathize with landlords. They don't naturally or usually get an advocate. Let's say that they're kind of stand alone as like they're the easy one to point to. But today, I kind of want to point at them a little bit. And it's because I think it's important in order to warn tenants of what's coming down the pipe. So I want to start talking about the cost of rent in Toronto, just to kind of set the tone here. This starts with a BlogTO article. After over a year of lockdowns, things have been looking up. Patios are opening, retail is getting back in business. But as things start to return to normal, so too do Toronto's rent prices. Remember how fun rent prices were a few years ago? Well, get ready. Buckle your seatbelt. Toronto rents were down a staggering 20% year over year in November. You guys tenants were probably cheering that on. Woohoo! Let's go. Good things, right? Good opportunities. Finally, a bit of an opportunity to get a discount. In March, the city started to see rent prices increase after nearly 15 months of declines. You guys will remember by April, I was actually saying that there's going to be a trend here. Now's the time we're going to start to see an increase in the rent rates. But reporters were very reluctant. In some ways, I think this is the first article I'm seeing this. They're probably still reluctant to suggest that without extra months of data, we can't determine if things are going to continue. Is this an ongoing trend or is this just a blip in the radar? Well, I think now we're going to start to see more and more people, like I've been saying for months, recognizing that this is more of a long-term trend. It isn't rocket science, by the way. I'm just a simple pilot that always flies the same plane. Guess you could say I'm very dedicated to my craft. But this month, the PadMapper Canadian Rent Report found nearly 2/3 of Canadian cities experience growing rents again. Continuing, Toronto is actually just behind Vancouver for the highest median rents in Canada, which is funny because I remember just months ago, we were talking about how Toronto wasn't even the most expensive. There were other neighboring GTA cities that were higher than Toronto. What happened to that? I guess that's old news now. In Toronto, 1 and 2 bedroom rents inched up 0.6% and 0.4% for the last month, respectively. Medians are at $1,800 and $2,320, respectively. And it's worth noting that rents are still down 17% year over year. So you could say, yeah, there's a deal. And there absolutely is a deal. But it also tells me there's lots of room upwards. So lock in, tenants. There's your warning number one. And as I'm looking at some of the GTA active rental stats for the week, get this from Alex Zeland on Twitter, inventory is virtually unchanged since last week. So we don't see any ups, we don't see any downs, just seems to be relatively flat since we had a very steep decline in listings over the last little while. I mean, you can only decline so much before there's literally no listings left. And I think we've hit that plateau. So here we go. What I want to say, where I want to head here, guys, this is going to get a little more serious, right? Because I'm expecting hard times ahead. And what we're watching before our eyes is the financialization of housing these days. This is what's going on, guys. And maybe that's not a word I've used, financialization. Maybe it's one I should start using more often, but that's really what's happening when we're not defending the local and we're really just allowing money from large investors, from foreign companies to pour into our markets. And I had people comment, you're going to do this article. And absolutely, I'm going to cover this article. In fact, this is probably the most serious article I've had in this entire show. The Globe and Mail had an article called Condo Developer Plans to Buy $1 billion Worth of Single Family Houses in Canada for Rentals. A Toronto condo developer is buying hundreds of detached houses, developers, with a plan of renting them and profiting on the housing crisis ripping across the country. which drives me crazy. The feds, they just shrug their shoulders like, whatever, right? They're simply creating housing for renters across Ontario, right? That's all that's going on. They're totally ignoring that it's killing the hopes of Canadians ever owning a home. Shouldn't we at least try to recognize the bad guy? You want to know the difference between a Taliban fighter and an Afghan child? Well, don't ask liberals. They just pilot the drone, right? Core Development Group Limited is building a large-scale single-family home rental operation, an unproven business model in Canada where the market is fragmented and individual investors lease a small number of their own properties for income. I mean, we've had guests come on our show, and they'll own dozens and dozens of properties, and they get so much flack from some of you guys. But that's the top of the food chain. That's it, guys. We've got mostly small investors, a couple rental properties, and that has been, in my opinion, praised, right? The apartment space as well right now is extremely competitive. We're seeing big players pivoting. One of the things that I find interesting, one of the values of an apartment building is that the way you qualify for a mortgage is less dependent on your income, more dependent on the profitability of that unit. But if I'm going to go in and buy 10 single family homes that I convert into duplexes, I'm able to, as a mortgage product, package those. I can bundle those into a commercial financing and still maintain the same beautiful qualification guidelines as someone who would be buying a multifamily apartment building. So these are things that are going on, but we've been kind of laughing. I mean, in the last few weeks, it feels like a month ago that I said that I'm concerned about the US market because I'm seeing these including Canada, I'm seeing companies moving in and buying up all of these single family homes. And one of the nice things about being in Canada is we don't have that till now. Institutional house rentals have become highly lucrative in the US with private equity firms, pension funds, big companies throwing billions of dollars into the asset class. In Canada, deep-pocketed investors as well as real estate investment trusts have already acquired hundreds of apartment buildings to tap into the strong rental demand, but have not moved into rental houses. Man, so here's what they say. Quote, "We were trying to answer the question." This is Core's president, by the way. This is the president of the company doing this. "Why is nobody doing this in Canada? We could not come up with an objective answer to that. In Canada, it works as well or better than the US. This is a developer. They're ready to go, ready to buy that single family from you. But I mean, you're trying to sell a single family home, so they're going to pay the highest amount for the property. Why not? Why not? It's really funny because we've chatted with guests. I can think of a few guests off the top of my head. We chatted with guests about how you can have a large investor move in today. They don't even have to be that big into one of these smaller markets because the supply is so low and buy up all of the properties. And I really didn't want that to happen, but it is. It is. Core's main business is condo development. In fact, he got 14 projects in the Toronto region right now, but last fall. So it's not happening today. It's already been going on since last fall. Mr. Houghton raised $250 million from investors to buy approximately, here's the plan, 400 properties, add basement apartments, and turn the houses into 2 rental units. You know that kind of easy burr strategy that you've been thinking, I can probably get into this space and do it? Yeah, they're going to compete against you now. So it's not just tenants, by the way, getting beat up. It's these small investors. These are who you're competing against now, multi-billion-dollar companies. Core is targeting 8 mid-sized cities in Ontario, and this year started buying properties in. These are the cities, guys. So if you want to partner with this company and other developers and watch prices, again, like the financialization of real estate happen, including your property, here's the cities to do it. Kingston, St. Catharines, London, Barrie, Hamilton, Peterborough, and Cambridge. And it'll soon start buying in Guelph. Its medium-term goal is to buy, listen to this, $1 billion portfolio of 4,000 rental units in Ontario, Quebec, BC, and Atlantic Canada by 2026. That's only 5 years away. Holy smokes, $1 billion gets scooped up out of our market like nothing in the next 5 years. So they believe a major house rental business will flourish in Canada because of decades of low rental vacancy rates, which is now what's happening again. This is why we're expecting prices to go up. Desire for more space, and Mr. Trudeau is excited. And while we were in the middle of a pandemic, we were probably all pretty excited about high levels of immigration. But when demand is what drives our market so heavy, a high increase in immigration, man, tenants, you guys have a whopping amount of, demand coming at you. And the only reason that they're looking at this as a valid investment option is because it works. It's successful. Making money as a landlord is a great and beautiful thing. The pandemic real estate boom has priced even more residents out of housing markets with rentals as the only option. I mean, but then at least they're giving us housing options, right? They're fulfilling that need that they've created. Core chose the 8 Ontario cities because they all have strong local economies, are closer to larger job centers, have growing populations, and low housing vacancy rates. So far this year, Core has spent $50 million on 75 properties. And I don't think everyone's going to want to just run to these 8 cities. Yes, you're going to see some price appreciation because, and the other thing they're doing is they're buying them in proximity to each other so that they can kind of manage them as they would a large multifamily home. But a lot of people might say, no, to hell with that. You don't want any part of that because that also creates higher risk. What if they decide overnight to sell, 50 properties, all flood the market? Not to say they're going to do that to kill themselves, but you get my point. You're playing a high stakes poker over here. So the warning, this is step 1. Expect many more giants to move in. That's one company in the next 5 years, $1 billion, 400 properties. But Toronto-based Tricon Residential, one of the largest operators of single-family home rentals in the U.S., said Core's decision to split the properties into 2 rental units makes sense given the prices of houses in Canada, meaning they can kind of get that positive cash flow. But we have the United States who are currently doing this. They are now starting to say, hey, maybe there's an opportunity in Canada. Other than the fact that our dollar is so strong relative to the US, maybe that's what's protecting us today. God forbid that gets to any level of back to balance. But anyways, Tom Davidoff had a comment on Twitter. Totally fine to disagree, of course. And not like this is a welfare home run, but pushing on the idea. If these were institutional guys buying up a lot of condo pre-sales to rent indefinitely, would you have the same intuitive objection? Not sure I see the distinction. Is there much of a distinction between someone building a condo and just keeping it and renting it out, or buying a single family home and just renting it out? And then the reason that I love this is there was a really clever response from Aaron Valancourt. And he said, 1 is actually adding to new supply. So at least if you're building a condo and you're renting it out, at least you built a condo, you rented it out, right? You added to supply. In this scenario, no, we're taking one away. In the end, large scale landlords are winning by design. Average Canadians are going to keep losing. That includes you tenants, you small landlords, and your government isn't doing anything about it. Maybe Trudeau isn't a very good pilot after all. He's too down to earth. And so what we're also seeing right now is a tension between landlords and tenants continuing to rise. Globe and Mail points to this specifically in an article that reads, as temperatures rise, Toronto tenants told to not use window air conditioners due to a risk of falling units. So there's been a lot of pressure. There's always been a bit of, a conflict between landlords and tenants, but it's become no more powerful than during the pandemic. And the expectation of you can't kick them out, can't increase rents, rent evictions, all of this is just a feud that's going on. Well, here's one more to add, where we're starting to see landlords getting a little bit clever here and working in their own self-interest, but in some ways against the law. Thousands of tenants across Toronto have received messages from large landlords and property managers warning them not to install window-mounted air conditioning units just ahead of the scorching summer months. So don't put that in. It's dangerous. Dangerous. We've had hundreds of calls in the last month. This is the Federation of Metro Tenants Association. Gordy Dent, who's the executive director, said, this is going to kill people. A bunch of people sheltering at home are going to not use their AC units because they think they're not allowed to, which they are. And this is kind of where the whole conflict comes in. But why would a landlord do this? Why would they kind of stick their neck on the line and say, don't use an air conditioning unit out your window? Well, the letters describe these units as posing a safety risk. It's a risk. And though not explicitly outlined, spokesperson of the landlord and tenants group agree the risk they refer to is from a 2019, 2 years ago, incident at a Toronto Community Housing Corporation building where a window-mounted AC unit fell in November and killed 2-year-old Crystal Morago. Following the tragic death, the TCHC had to replace more than 8,500 window-mounted AC units at its building at no cost to the tenant. That's an expensive bill to be footed by a landlord. Thanks, Mr. Tenant, for using the AC units. But I think if I were to look at it from a whole, you got one scenario of someone getting, dying from this, but look at the numbers. For the past 70 years, Toronto has averaged about 120 heat-related premature deaths a year, according to a 2005 study by Environment Canada. So from sheer numbers, your odds of getting crushed by an AC unit out of a window is significantly less than the person dying because they don't have an AC unit in their building, in their apartment. But landlords are trying to pass this risk along, even though they aren't allowed to. And why wouldn't they, right? They're in a business of making money, and the landlord-tenant board is a joke. Tenants, want to hear an airplane joke? Never mind, it'll probably fly over your head. Stop laughing. This is not funny. This is serious. Medallion sent a 3-page letter titled, here's the title, Imagine getting this as a renter in your apartment. Acknowledgement, representation, warranty, indemnification, and waiver. That's the name. It's like, oh, that sounds serious, no? That asks tenants to take on all liability of any injury related to a window unit. It refers to a previous notice from September 2020 that only floor model AC units, ones where the mechanical parts are not mounted in the window frame, are quote unquote permitted. You're not allowed using those window ones. Here's what this letter is crazy. Listen to what it does. It warns that anyone with a window mounted unit that is not above a balcony has to provide proper documentation, they call it, to the landlord by June 4th, 2021. And if not, the tenant will be subject to legal action from the landlord. We're going to get you. We're going to get you. You better get this thing proper documentation, or whatever that means. There's no ground for this, though. Miss Heffernan said, this is one of the people that they're asking about it from the legal perspective, that she's not aware of any such cases arising in the LTB. There is no grounds I can see under the law that this would win in court. There's no leg for a landlord to stand on. But they're giving them a pretty strong kick in the butt, nevertheless. And so the demands continue. The medallion waiver also includes, listen to this, clauses that attempt to modify the lease of tenants. One line in the waiver says the tenant agrees, quote, I will pay the landlord's additional prescribed charge for electricity consumption wherein electricity charges are included in my rent. So if I've got an AC unit, even though utilities are included, now because I've got this AC unit, now you're going to charge me beyond what my initial agreement was in my lease agreement. Briar Lane's letter also informed tenants it was imposing a $40 a month surcharge for air conditioning units if electricity was included in their rent payment. There you go. You got to pay more. We kind of agreed on a certain amount. Now you got to pay more. But tenants do have rights. They just don't know they do. And this is really the problem that's being exploited, right? Quote, if the lease says nothing about extra charges for AC, the landlord cannot, I repeat, cannot charge more. If the landlord is contravening this, the LTB should overturn it. However, tenants should dispute this sooner rather than later. Now, my friends, my tenant friends out there, is the time to push back. And tenants are certainly doing that. What do we want? Low-flying airplane noises. When do we want them? Meow. Anyways, I hope you guys had some fun today like I did. If you haven't already, please leave us a 5-star review and a 5-star rating and review. And I promise that I'm going to continue to read some of these out to you guys. And who knows, you leave us one, maybe you'll hear yourself on the air. Thank you, Brewski93, who said, I have started listening to your show recently and love that it explores all topics real estate, from BRRRR to holding, non-conventional strategies, and more. Oh, and a lot of dad jokes. Fantastic. Glad you appreciate it, my friend. And I hope you guys do too. Your comments, they always bring color to my life, unlike those lame aircrafts, man, always painted white. I don't know, but it just seems a bit plain to me. I'm going to leave it there, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care and keep it real.